She built an empire taffel and still came home to no one. Tonight, one small hand was about to change everything.
A little girl saw what no one else noticed a face, and a single dad's daughter just introduced her father to his future.
Everyone assumed they were a couple, and in that one silent second, neither of them said no. A CEO and a baker, worlds apart, but for the first time in years, both of them were smiling at the same phone screen.
One headline exposed her secret. Now the only man who ever made her feel like herself wasn't picking up the phone.
Evelyn Marsh had built an empire out of loneliness. At 34, she was the CEO of Marsh Dynamics, a logistics and technology conglomerate that moved cargo across 4 continents and employed 12,000 people. She had a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows, a driver who called her Ms. Marsh, with the kind of respect that felt more like fear, and a calendar so full that her assistant scheduled her lunches in 15-minute increments. What she did not have was anyone to come home to. Her marriage had ended 6 years earlier, not with a dramatic collapse, but with a slow, suffocating silence, the kind that fills a house when 2 people stop trying. Since then, she had thrown herself into work with the ferocity of someone running from a feeling she refused to name. Daniel Cole was the opposite kind of tired. He was 36, a single father raising his 7-year-old daughter, Lily, in a 2-bedroom apartment above the bakery where he worked as head pastry chef. His wife had passed away 3 years earlier after a long illness, and in the wreckage of that loss, Daniel had rebuilt his entire life around one small, stubborn commitment. Lily would never feel like she was missing anything. He worked mornings, picked her up from school every single day, and spent his nights making sure her homework was done, her hair was brushed, and her nightmares were chased away with the same 3 bedtime stories she demanded on rotation. He hadn't been on a date in 3 years. He hadn't wanted to be. Evelyn had not always been this way. There had been a version of her, years earlier, who wanted to study tide pools on the Oregon coast, who kept a dog-eared field guide to marine invertebrates under her bed, who once cried with joy at an aquarium exhibit on bioluminescent jellyfish. Her father, the founder of what would become Marsh Dynamics, had looked at that dreamy, tender daughter and decided, gently but immovably, that she was too capable to waste on starfish. She had gone to business school instead, told herself the ache she felt was simply ambition finding its proper shape, and by the time she inherited the company at 29 after his sudden death, she had become so fluent in efficiency that softness felt like a language she'd forgotten how to speak. Her ex-husband, a hedge fund manager named Preston, had liked the efficient version of her just fine, right up until he didn't. Right up until the sudden marriage became 2 people co-managing a household like a joint venture that had quietly stopped generating returns. There had been no affair, no explosive fight, just 2 people who woke up one day and realized they had optimized the love right out of their marriage. The divorce had been swift, clean, and almost embarrassingly amicable, which somehow made it worse. Evelyn had grieved it alone, in board meetings, in the particular silence of a penthouse too large for one person's footsteps. Daniel had not always been this way either. Before Lily, before the hospital corridors and the late-night shifts and the terrifying calm required to hold a family together while it was breaking, he had been the kind of man who laughed loudly and often, who had once dreamed of opening his own patisserie instead of working under someone else's, says name on the awning. His wife, Rachel, had been the one who pushed him toward pastry school in the first place, the one who tasted every failed croissant with theatrical enthusiasm and told him each attempt was better than the last, even when it plainly was not. Her diagnosis had come 8 months after Lily's 2nd birthday, and the 18 months that followed had taught Daniel more about endurance than anything else in his life. He had learned to braid hair from online videos at 2 a.m. He had learned to explain death to a toddler in language soft enough not to break her but honest enough not to lie. He had learned, above all, that love that vanishes still costs everything it ever promised, and he had quietly decided he could not survive paying that price twice. So he built a small, safe, unremarkable life around Lily and told himself it was enough. and mostly believed it. Their paths were never supposed to cross. Evelyn Marsh moved in circles of boardrooms and shareholder meetings. Daniel Cole moved in circles of flower dust and Lily's kindergarten fundraisers. But fate, as it so often does, found a narrow door between two very different worlds. And it opened at the wedding of Evelyn's cousin, Grace, on the rooftop terrace of the Ashford Hotel on a warm September evening. Evelyn hadn't wanted to go. She'd nearly sent her regrets, buried as she was in a merger that was consuming every waking hour. But Grace was the only family member who had never once made her feel like a failure for being alone. And so Evelyn put on a deep emerald dress, forced a smile, and walked into the reception telling herself she would stay for exactly 1 hour. Daniel was there because his sister Marissa was the wedding planner, and she'd begged him for a favor. The caterer's dessert chef had backed out 2 days before the event, and Daniel, unable to say no to his sister, had spent the last 48 hours building a 5-tier lemon lavender cake and a table of pastries that looked like something out of a magazine. He'd brought Lily along because his usual babysitter had a family emergency, and Lily, in her yellow dress with her hair in 2 crooked braids, had become the unofficial mascot of the wedding within 20 minutes, charming every guest who crossed her path. It was Lily who brought them together. Evelyn had wandered toward the dessert table more out of habit than hunger, needing 5 minutes away from the small talk that made her skin itch, when a small hand tugged at her dress. "Are you sad?" Lily asked, tilting her head with the unfiltered honesty only a child can manage. Evelyn blinked, caught completely off guard. "What makes you think that?" "You have a wedding face but sad eyes," Lily said, matter-of-factly. "My daddy makes cakes that fix sad eyes. Want one?" Before Evelyn could answer, Daniel appeared, mortified, scooping Lily gently by the shoulder. "I am so sorry. She talks to everyone. She has zero—" "It's fine," Evelyn said, and to her own surprise, she meant it. There was something in the girl's directness that cracked something open in her chest, something she'd kept locked for years. "She's right, actually. I do have sad eyes tonight." Daniel studied her for a moment, the kind of look that wasn't polite curiosity but genuine attention, a rare thing in Evelyn's world where everyone wanted something from her. "Then you should try the lavender cake," he said. "It's the only thing on this table I'd actually recommend for existential crises." She laughed, a real laugh, surprising herself with the sound of it, and took the small plate he offered. They ended up talking for the rest of the night. Not about mergers or bakeries, not about status or money, but about small things. Lily's obsession with dinosaurs, the way Evelyn used to want to be a marine biologist before her father convinced her business was the only respectable path, the particular ache of coming home to an apartment that never quite felt lived in. Daniel didn't know she was a CEO. She hadn't offered it, and for once, no one at the party had said her title out loud in front of him. She was simply Evelyn, and he was simply Daniel, and for 3 hours, that was enough. When Lily fell asleep against her father's shoulder near midnight, Daniel finally admitted he needed to take her home. Evelyn walked them to the elevator, and as the doors opened, a group of wedding guests, mostly Grace's co-workers, half drunk on champagne and sentimentality, spotted them together. "Oh my gosh, look at you two," one woman gushed, snapping a photo before anyone could react. "The perfect little family. You two make the cutest couple." Evelyn opened her mouth to correct her. It would have taken 3 seconds. "We just met. We're not together." But she looked at Daniel, holding his sleeping daughter, looking exhausted and warm and real in a way nothing in her life had felt in years, and the words simply didn't come. Daniel, too, seemed frozen, glancing at her with an expression she couldn't quite read, not panic exactly, but something like hope colliding with disbelief. "Get a room, seriously, you're glowing," another guest teased, and the group moved on, laughing, already forgetting the moment even happened. Evelyn did not correct them. Neither did Daniel. They stood in the sudden quiet of the hallway, the elevator doors closing behind the departing guests, and something unspoken passed between them, an understanding that neither of them fully grasped yet, but both felt in the pit of their stomachs. Daniel finally broke the silence. "That was A lot, he said, adjusting Lily against his shoulder. It was, Evelyn agreed, and then, before she could stop herself, "Can I get your number?" "Not, for Lily, to ask about the cake recipe. My sad eyes might need it again." Daniel smiled, the kind of smile that reached all the way to his eyes. "I think that can be arranged." They exchanged numbers, and Evelyn watched them disappear into the elevator. Lily's small hand still curled into her father's collar. She stood alone in the hallway for a long moment, staring at the new contact in her phone. Daniel and Lily, feeling something she hadn't wound, the terrifying, thrilling sensation of a door opening. Over the following weeks, what began as texts about cake recipes became something else entirely. Daniel would send her photos of Lily's latest art projects. Evelyn would send back voice notes recorded during her lunch breaks, tucked into stairwells to escape the noise of the office, laughing at things that had no business being that funny. They met for coffee, actual coffee, nothing more, because Daniel was careful, deliberate, unwilling to introduce chaos into Lily's world without being certain. Evelyn respected that more than she could say. It was the first time in years someone had treated her not as an acquisition to be won, but as a person to be understood slowly. She still hadn't told him she was a CEO. It wasn't a lie, not exactly. It simply never came up, and the longer it didn't, the harder it became to say. Because with Daniel, she wasn't Miss Marsh who closed 9-figure deals. She was the woman who admitted she didn't know how to swim, who confessed she cried during dog food commercials, who asked him nervous, earnest questions about what 7-year-olds actually like to do on weekends. She liked that version of herself. She was terrified that the moment he learned the truth, that version would disappear, replaced by the wariness she saw in every other person's eyes once they learned what she was worth. The truth came out on a Tuesday, in the cruelest way it could have. Marsh Dynamics was in the middle of a hostile acquisition attempt, and a business journalist covering the story had recognized Evelyn's name attached to a charity gala photo, one where, unknown to her, Daniel and Lily had been standing beside her, having tagged along because Lily had begged to see the pretty lights. The photo went out under a headline that made Evelyn's stomach drop the moment she saw it on her phone. Marsh Dynamics CEO Evelyn Marsh, spotted with mystery boyfriend and daughter at Children's Tennis Hospital Gala. Daniel found out not from Evelyn, but from his sister, who called him in a panic, having seen the article trending. He read it standing in his kitchen, Lily doing homework at the counter behind him, and felt something in his chest go cold. CEO. Fortune 500. Estimated net worth in the hundreds of millions. Every word felt like a stranger's biography grafted onto the woman he'd spent 2 months falling for. He didn't call her that night. He needed to think, needed to understand why the person he'd told about his wife's death, about his fears for Lily, about the quiet grief he still carried, had never once mentioned that she ran one of the largest companies in the country. Evelyn called him instead, twice, then a third time. When he finally answered, his voice was flat in a way she'd never heard before. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. "I didn't know how," she admitted, her voice cracking despite every effort to keep it steady. "Daniel, the moment people find out who I am, they change. They get careful, or they get greedy, or they get scared. I didn't want that with you. I didn't want you to look at me the way everyone else does. So instead you let me fall for someone who doesn't exist," Daniel said, and the words landed like a slap, even though she could hear how much they cost him to say. "I exist," she said quietly. "I'm the same person who cried during that dog commercial. I'm the same person who asked you 100 questions about Lily's favorite dinosaur, because I genuinely wanted to know. None of that was a lie, Daniel. The only thing I didn't tell you was my job title. It's not just a job title, Evelyn. It's an entire life I know nothing about. Board meetings, investors, people who probably want things from you every single hour of every single day. I have a 7-year-old who already lost one parent to something she couldn't control. I can't bring someone into her life who might vanish into a world I can't even see, let alone protect her from." The call ended without resolution, Daniel's voice tight with a hurt that went deeper than the sand. It touched the rawest fear he carried, the fear of losing control over his daughter's stability ever again. Evelyn sat alone in her penthouse that night, staring at the skyline she'd spent a decade climbing toward, and understood for the first time that all the power in the world hadn't taught her the one thing that mattered most: how to be known. 3 weeks of silence followed. Evelyn threw herself into the hostile takeover defense, working 18-hour days that left no room for feeling anything at all, though feeling found her anyway. In the quiet moments, an elevator that smelled faintly like lavender cake, a stray thought about how Lily liked her cocoa with extra marshmallows, a reflex to reach for her phone to share something funny, before remembering there was no one to share it with anymore. Her assistant, Priya, who had worked beside her for 6 years and had never once seen Evelyn falter in a negotiation, noticed the change first. It showed up in small ways: a coffee order left untouched on the desk for hours, a rare snap of impatience during a call that would normally have rolled off her without comment, the way she stayed in the office long after the takeover briefings ended, staring at nothing in particular. When Priya finally worked up the nerve to ask if everything was all right, Evelyn simply said, "I made someone believe I trusted them, and then I proved I didn't," and refused to say another word on the subject. Priya wisely let it go, though she started leaving lavender tea on Evelyn's desk instead of the usual espresso, a small kindness Evelyn never acknowledged but never once threw away. The board, meanwhile, was circling. The attempted takeover had emboldened a faction of shareholders who had always resented that a woman in her 30s controlled a company her father built, and the tabloid attention around the gala photo gave them a new angle to exploit: the narrative that Evelyn Marsh was distracted, unfocused, perhaps even unfit to steer the company through a contested fight. 2 board members requested an emergency session to discuss leadership optics. Evelyn sat through the meeting with her spine straight and her expression unreadable, dismantling their arguments point by point with the same precision she brought to every negotiation. But that night, alone in her office, she allowed herself exactly 4 minutes to put her head down on the desk and simply breathe, before straightening up and going back to work. She would not let them see the cost. She had spent her entire adult life making sure no one saw the cost. Daniel, for his part, buried himself in the bakery, working longer hours than Marissa thought was healthy, snapping at ingredients that hadn't done anything wrong. He ruined 2 batches of choux pastry that week, something he hadn't done since his apprenticeship. And Marissa finally cornered him by the walk-in fridge and told him, with the particular bluntness only a sister can get away with, that he was allowed to miss someone even if he was still angry at her. Daniel didn't answer, just kept piping batter onto the tray in front of him with more force than necessary, but her words lodged somewhere he couldn't quite dislodge them from. Lily noticed before anyone else did. "You have sad eyes, Daddy," she told him one evening, echoing the very words that had started everything. Like the lady from the wedding, Daniel froze over the mixing bowl. "What do you mean, baby?" "You always smiled when you texted her," Lily said, with the piercing simplicity only children possess. "Now you don't smile at anything." That night, after Lily fell asleep, Daniel sat at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold in front of him, turning the last 3 weeks over in his mind. He thought about what had actually hurt him. Not that Evelyn had money or power, but that she'd hidden a part of herself, the same instinct he recognized because he did it too, in his own way. He'd never told her, not fully, how terrified he still was some nights, alone in a bed too big for one person, wondering if he was doing any of this right. He'd never told her about the nights he sat outside Lily's door, listening to make sure she was still breathing evenly, a habit from the hospital days he couldn't shake. He had built his own walls, quieter than hers but no less real. Maybe, he realized, they hadn't fallen for each other's resumes or their carefully curated version of a Tuesday. They had fallen for the versions of each other that showed up at 11 p.m. Text messages and quiet coffee shop confessions. The versions that were, underneath everything, simply trying to be less alone. He picked up his phone and typed, then deleted, then typed again, for almost an hour, before finally sending 5 words. "Lily misses the lavender lady." Evelyn read the message at 1 a.m., sitting on the floor of her office with case files spread around her like fallen leaves. She read it 4 times before she let herself cry. The kind of crying that had been building for 6 years, not just 3 weeks. She typed back with shaking hands, "The lavender lady misses her too. And her father, more than I know how to say." They agreed to meet, not at a restaurant or a boardroom, but at the same bakery where Daniel worked. After closing, when the ovens were cool and the shop was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the soft city noise outside. Evelyn arrived without her driver, without an assistant, in jeans instead of a tailored suit, looking, for the first time since the gala photo broke, like a person instead of a headline. The bell over the door gave its familiar little chime as she stepped inside, and for a moment neither of them said anything at all, the silence stretching just long enough to feel dangerous before Daniel broke it with a small, uncertain smile that undid something tight in Evelyn's chest. Daniel was waiting at the counter, 2 mugs of cocoa already poured, extra marshmallows in one of them. "I should have told you," Evelyn said, before he could speak, needing to get it out before her nerve failed her. "Not because you deserved a warning, but because you deserved the truth from the start. I spent so long protecting myself from people who only wanted my name that I forgot how to let someone in without the armor. That's on me, not on you, not on Lily, not on any of this." Daniel exhaled slowly, some of the tension in his shoulders finally loosening. "I've been thinking a lot about why it hurt the way it did," he said. "And it wasn't really about the company, or the money, or any of it. It was that I thought I'd finally found someone who saw me, just me, the guy covered in flour who reads the same 3 bedtime stories every night. And then I found out there was a whole part of your life I knew nothing about. It made me scared that maybe you hadn't really seen me either. That maybe none of it was as real as it felt." "It was real," Evelyn said immediately, fiercely, surprising herself with the certainty in her own voice. "Daniel, it's the only real thing I've had in years. Do you know what it's like to sit in rooms full of people every single day who need something from you? A signature, a decision, a favor, a headline, and then to meet someone who just wanted to know if I liked pineapple on pizza?" She laughed, wet and unsteady. "I didn't tell you about the company, because with you, I finally got to just be a person again. I was terrified that the moment you knew, I'd lose that. I'd lose you." "You wouldn't have lost me over a job title," Daniel said quietly. "You might have lost me over the lie. There's a difference. I need you to understand that difference, because I have a daughter who needs consistency more than almost anything else in this world, and I can't build something with someone who hides pieces of herself when things get complicated." "Then let me try again," Evelyn said. "All of it, this time. No omissions. I'll tell you about the takeover fight I'm in the middle of, and the board meeting I have Thursday, and the fact that I genuinely don't know how to be in a relationship because the last one ended so quietly I didn't notice it was over until it already was. I'll tell you I'm scared, Daniel. I'm scared of exactly this. Of being known and then left anyway. But I'd rather be scared and honest than safe and alone." Daniel reached across the counter and took her hand. The first time they had touched with any real intention since the wedding. "Lily asked me last week if you were going to be her friend forever," he said. I didn't know what to tell her. I think I'd like the answer to be yes. But that has to be something we build slowly, on purpose, with both eyes open. No more rooftop misunderstandings we're too afraid to correct. "No more misunderstandings," Evelyn agreed. "Just the truth, even when it's inconvenient." It wasn't a fairy tale reconciliation. Not the kind with a swelling orchestra and a dramatic kiss in the rain. It was smaller and steadier than that. A series of Tuesday dinners at Daniel's apartment, where Evelyn learned to fold dumplings badly and Lily critiqued her efforts without mercy. A Saturday spent teaching Lily to identify constellations from the roof of Evelyn's building, the city lights dimmed enough by distance to see a handful of stars. Long phone calls where Evelyn talked through boardroom stress, and Daniel talked through the quiet grief that still visited him some anniversaries. And neither of them flinched from the other's hard days. 6 months later, Evelyn hosted a small dinner at her penthouse, deliberately unglamorous, takeout containers spread across the table because she still couldn't had stopped pretending otherwise. Lily, now 8, sat between them, narrating an elaborate story about a dinosaur who ran a bakery, while Daniel and Evelyn exchanged a look over her head. The kind of look that didn't need words. The kind built from months of choosing honesty over comfort, again and again. Grace, the cousin whose wedding had started it all, called Evelyn that week to catch up, and somewhere in the conversation, laughing, she brought up that night on the rooftop. "You know," Grace said, "everyone at that wedding still talks about how perfect you two look together. Best guess anyone made all year." Evelyn glanced across the room at Daniel, who was crouched on the floor helping Lily glue popsicle sticks into what was supposedly a dinosaur enclosure. Flour still dusted faintly on his sleeve from the bakery earlier that day. "They weren't wrong," Evelyn said softly. "They were just early." It had taken a mistaken assumption at a wedding, a headline neither of them wanted. 3 weeks of painful silence, and the fearless honesty of a 7-year-old with sad-eye radar to bring two guarded, exhausted people back to each other. Not as a CEO and a single dad performing roles the world assigned them, but as two people who had finally learned that being truly known was worth far more than being safely hidden. A year after the wedding where it all began, Evelyn stood on that same rooftop terrace, this time not as a guest slipping away early, but as a woman standing beside Daniel and Lily, watching the sun set over a skyline she no longer needed to hide behind. Lily held both their hands, swinging between them the way children do when the world finally feels steady enough to play in. "Are you still sad?" Lily asked, looking up at Evelyn with the same directness that had started everything. Evelyn smiled, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, it reached all the way to her eyes. "No, sweetheart," she said. "Not even a little. If this story moved you, remember, sometimes the family you're searching for is standing right beside you, disguised as a stranger's daughter asking why you look sad." Like this video, subscribe for more stories like this one, and tell us in the comments, would you have corrected them, or let the moment become something real?